What's up, everybody? So I'm going to try to keep this video short. I know sometimes I get long-winded. I want to talk about something that's going to come up in this next election, definitely, when it comes to it'll be something brought up definitely when with the election with AOC, who I do not support. I think she's a whacked out nut job that she's a definite prodigy for Nancy Pelosi. Just but with that said, one of the things that's going to be used against her is the Amazon deal falling through. I escaped New York years ago. And I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of somebody who actually works for a living and earns a paycheck for it, income. I lived in poverty my whole life in New York. And I've worked hard my whole life in New York. When I left New York, I moved to Florida. In Florida, I made less money, but my actual lifestyle increased. And it really comes down to the tax and regulatory issues that states like New York, New Jersey, California all have in common. When you live in a state where a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Amazon cannot afford to operate unless it bribes the politicians to get special subsidies that a normal mom and pop business could never afford to bribe politicians to get that same treatment, it's obvious there's something wrong with your tax and regulatory policies. And that's why the whole deal with Amazon fell through. Because the guy running and starting up from scratch a little corner store can't get the same benefits. And that affects the average worker too, because the whole tax and regulatory issues trickles down into the employee as well. And people just trying to make a living in states like New York, New Jersey, California, I would argue to some extent Illinois. And people really need to question who they're going to be voting for this year. When I left New York and I went to Florida, my income, I won't say it was cut in half, but it was probably cut by a third. But even with that 1/3 cut, within a year, my whole standard of living went up. And my whole life started to improve. Then came the housing crash. And I'm going to be honest with you. Me and my ex-wife were homeless for 6 or 7 months because of the housing crash. We actually had nothing but a car that was given to us. That was all we had after the housing crash and the job crash and everything that went downhill. From that, I picked everything back up We slowly put everything back together. And within 5 years, we bought a house. I never owned a home in New York. I worked my whole life. I worked harder in New York, and I never owned a home in New York. But I worked harder in New York than I have ever worked in Florida. I have never, since moving to Florida, worked as hard one single day. Well, maybe one day. There was one day, maybe. But that was working for a day laborer running behind a garbage truck all day. That is probably the only day the whole time I have lived in Florida where I worked as hard as I did my whole life in New York. Yet in New York, I never had nothing. In New York, my bills were always being paid late. In New York, I could never afford to keep my car insured. My car insurance has never fallen behind except for during the housing crash. But once I got back on my feet and we figured out a budget and we figured out, even while we were homeless, our car insurance was always paid. I was homeless, but my car insurance was always paid. We always had insurance on our car while homeless. And I could have never done that in New York. I couldn't keep my car insurance paid in New York while I was working harder than I ever worked in Florida. And it's because of the regulations and taxes. Once we got back on our feet and started putting things back together, we actually were able to build up a life saving nickels and dimes. I couldn't save nickels and dimes in New York. I couldn't save pennies in New York. Never mind saving nickels, dimes, and dollars. I never had a 401k any single day in my life in New York. Within 2.5 years after the housing crash, within 3.5 years after the housing crash, I had my first 401k. Living in Florida, I took my first vacation ever. Now, I had staycations in New York, but I never had a vacation in New York. Me and my ex-wife went to England. I actually had a European vacation with no stress. I didn't stress money. And I still was only up to about my income level that I had when I left New York. But I had a European vacation. We spent $7,000 and had no stress about the money. Yet my whole life in New York, I couldn't even pay my car insurance every month on time because of the regulations and taxes in New York. So, the whole Amazon deal falling through, that should be bringing up a bigger question. Now, granted, we can all, like I said, I think the woman is a complete wacko. And the irony that she actually did something good is amazing to me. Yes, I understand she chased away jobs. And I understand why people would be upset about that. But you need to ask the bigger question. Why can't a multi-billion dollar, isn't it the richest corporation in America? Why cannot the richest corporation in America afford to operate in New York State? It needs special tax favors and special subsidies and special loan forgiveness and this and that to operate in New York. It's the richest corporation in America, if I'm not mistaken. If it's not the richest, it's up there. It's what, number 2 or number 3? If not number 1? And New York is not always a Democratic run state. Granted, it's a majority Democratic, but there's been times where Republicans have had all the power in New York. So both parties are responsible for all the regulation problems in New York. And if you're a Democrat or a Republican, that needs to be the question you really need to be asking. Why did they need these subsidies and this special treatment, which, by the way, they had to bribe politicians to get? You need to understand that. They had to bribe politicians to get those special favors. Oh yeah, they hide it. They make it look like it's not bribes anymore. They got special ways to make it not look like bribery. But at the end of the day, it was bribery. It is bribery to be able to get these special favors. And both parties are responsible for that kind of regulatory and tax system. In any state, subsidies by their own nature. If you say you're against socialism, communism, or fascism, then why on any level, with the exception of something catastrophic like what we just went through, I'm anti-subsidy, but I supported the idea of special favor subsidies and it should have been all the way across the board. I think that small businesses should have got just as much of a percentage as all these big corporations, and they didn't, and I'm upset with that. But everybody should have got the same treatment across the board when it came to the fact of the government, for realistic reasons, saying we needed to shut down the nation. And the reason we needed to shut down the nation, which I do understand, I mean, should we still be shut down? Should some states, I think it should be time to start releasing this. But it made sense in the beginning because we had no idea what we were dealing with. And it was the fact that we understood that this was going to overwhelm our hospital system. And if it overwhelmed our hospital systems, we were going to wind up with millions of people dead. And I understand that. And so I do support. There are times when the government stepping in and giving everybody money makes absolute sense. And this virus, it made absolute sense. I mean, that's what government is there for. Government that is there to protect the country. And this was a case where it was protecting the country. Doesn't mean I support the Michigan governor telling police to arrest people for going out with their family on a boat with just the household, meaning that they all live together in the same house and they're going out on a boat together, which by definition is social distancing, and trying to enjoy a day on the boat as a family, or going out somewhere where they can go fishing or going out somewhere where they can go picnicking just as a family, as a household. You know, so we have plenty of examples where the government overreached even while doing the right thing. But with the exception of something that catastrophic like what we just went through with the coronavirus, I am completely anti-subsidy. Because subsidies, by definition, is socialism, communism, and fascism. With the exception of a major catastrophe. Because that's what government is there for. It's there to protect the country in a major catastrophe. And so, in this case, that's a different story. And I do think the Fed should start rolling back. But that's a whole nother argument. But the elections are around the corner. And you need to start paying attention to, I'm not saying that I'm not anti-regulatory and I'm not anti-tax. You know, taxes and regulations are a necessary evil. But weaponized taxes and weaponized regulatory policies are what we are dealing with. It's the same with these wackos calling for defunding the police department. That's stupid. Now, I do agree we have more laws in this country to put somebody in jail than any other tyranny on the planet. We don't live in a nation of the free. We live in a nation of the oppressed. But our politicians created that oppression. And yeah, we need to be outraged by the bad police that get to weaponize that oppression even more than the politicians that weaponized it to begin with. But there's a lot of good cops out there that they're just stuck between a rock and a hard place because they're working for these same tyrants. And they need to support their families too. So, defunding the police, stupid, bad idea. Completely doing away with regulation, stupid, bad idea. Doing completely away with taxes, stupid, bad idea. I'm actually a strong supporter of the fair tax because the fair tax works a lot like the VAT tax, and I saw the way it works in England, and once you experience it, you're like, you know what? Why aren't we doing this? So, you need to pay attention to who you're voting for. And you need to stop drinking the party Kool-Aid, no matter what party you're in. Because I've been a registered Democrat my whole life. My whole life. I have, since the day I turned 18, I went down to the post office and I registered as a Democrat, and I registered with the Selective Service on right around my 18th birthday. I don't think I did it on my 18th birthday. It was right after my 18th birthday, within that month. My favorite presidents are John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Calvin Coolidge. When you look at those three presidents, though, it's easy to understand. Because, yeah, all three of them presidents, when it comes to their personal lives, they were very different people. One was a kind of a libertarian. One was a liberal, which is a soft libertarian, really. And one was a liberal as well, though he had strong conservative values, which is why everybody holds him up as a conservative. But Ronald Reagan really, all three of them ran the country the way you would expect a liberal to run the country. Not a progressive, a liberal, a libertarian. They all kind of floated around that spectrum of libertarianism, but all three of them led the country pretty much within their same parameters. When you look at all three of them presidents side by side, they all had little variations, but all three of the presidents ran the country the same way. All three of the presidents made mistakes. All three of the presidents had very different views when it came to their personal lifestyles. But when it came to running the country, all three of those presidents ran the countries in a very similar fashion. All three of them had a very anti-communism view, a very anti-fascist view, a very anti-socialist view. All three of them believed in a strong American army or armed forces. Army, Marine, our armed forces are all a strong military. All three of them believed in a reasonable tax system. All three of them believed in a reasonable regulatory system. Ronald Reagan made some mistakes when it came to subsidies, but generally he was anti-subsidy. John F. Kennedy, the same. Calvin Coolidge, definitely. And that's what you need to vote for this year. Everybody wants change. If you really want change, you need to vote for politicians that are going to bring in change. And you need politicians that are willing to roll back some of these laws that are on the books, some of these regulations that are on the books, and some of this overtaxation that is on the books. And they need to be treating all business equally. Whether you're a mom and pop or you're Amazon, whether you're Joe's Bodega or you're Walmart, whether you're Adam's Hardware Store or you're Home Depot, you're all treated with the same opportunity. You're all taxed the same, you're all regulated the same, and you all have the same opportunity to succeed or fail. And we don't live in a free market system. That's what a free market system is. And we don't live in that kind of system. Because if we're going to give a multi-billion-dollar company subsidies, that's not free market. If we're going to give a multi-billion-dollar company more tax leniency that already pays next to zero in taxes, that's not a free market. Amazon should be paying the same exact tax rate as Joe's Bodega. And they should, I would even argue that, we need to just do away with all the loopholes and all the write-offs. I'm a contractor. I get write-offs. I have multiple write-offs. And it's confusing, actually, in all honesty. I'd actually rather have no freaking write-offs and just a reasonable tax level. Because the tax level doesn't even matter. What's the point of taxing a corporation at 35% if you're going to give them so many loopholes that with creative lawyers, they have no taxes anyway? So it doesn't matter whether you can make the tax 100%. They're still going to be able to bring the taxes down to next to nothing because of all the loopholes and all the subsidies and all of this and all of that with lobbyists and lawyers and creative accountants. That's not free market. Free market is whether it's Joe's Bodegas, Adam's Hardware, Greg's Automotive, Adam's Garage, Napa, O'Reilly, Home Depot, Walmart, Amazon. Every one of them should be paying the same. Pete's Contracting. Every one of us should be paying the same tax rate on a corporate level. Now, if you want to say you can do away with all the loopholes, bring the taxes down, make them a reasonable tax rate, and they're actually going to pay taxes. Because think about it. Even if Amazon paid 10% tax, 10% tax is more than zero. Isn't it? Just do away with all the loopholes and bring in a low tax rate. 10% tax on $1 billion is a lot more money than 0% tax on $1 billion. You know what these tax loopholes create? Crony capitalism and corrupt politicians. You want to vote for change? Vote for people that are going to go in there and they're going to roll back tax laws. Vote for people that are going to go in there and they're going to vote back the over oppression of criminal laws. Vote for people that are going to go in there and vote to reduce the tax levels while getting rid of all these tax loopholes. Because 10% of tax, 10% of $1 billion is more than 0% of tax on $1 billion. And all parties are responsible for this. You need to remember, GE, that was Obama's big buddy. When's the last time they paid taxes? You need, think, talking about laws. The Patriot Act, one of the most unconstitutional, that law has shredded the Constitution more than any other law on the books. You know how many presidents signed that law? Most of you think Bush signed that law. Bush did sign the law. And Bush also had to renew the law. Know who else had to renew that law and did renew that law? Obama, multiple times, signed that law and renewed that law. Know who else signed that law and renewed that law? Trump. You know who brought that law to them presidents? Democrats, when they were in power, brought that law to the president to renew it. Republicans, when in power, brought that law back to the president to renew it. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, Paul Ryan, all the politicians brought that law back to the presidents to sign back in. That's a law. That's a law that has shredded our rights more than anything else. That's why you no longer, your constitutionally protected right to not have to show your papers. Basically what that means is you're supposed to be able to just walk down the street and not be harassed for your ID. The Patriot Act is the reason you no longer have your constitutional, that's why your constitutional right is being abolished every day. That is a constitutional right. That is your right. Yet, the Patriot Act just says, Why are we voting these people back in? I voted for Trump. I also voted for Obama. I voted for Obama his first term. I thought I was voting for someone like John F. Kennedy. I honestly did. I voted for Obama thinking I was getting a Kennedy. If I understood I was voting for a Lyndon Johnson, I would have never voted for Obama. I voted for Obama because I thought I was voting for a John F. Kennedy. I did not realize I was voting for a Lyndon Johnson. That's why I didn't re-elect Obama. I didn't vote for him the second time around. But I did vote for Trump. For Florida governor. I'm a registered Democrat. But I voted in Scott. Actually, I voted for him 2 out of his 3 terms. I actually like Scott. I think he was a great governor. He had his faults, but I think he was a good governor. I'm a Democrat. Since I was 18, I'm still a registered Democrat to this day. But I think he was a great governor. But it's just time for a change. I keep saying this all the time. I'm going to say it again. You need to just go in this year and we need to let them know that we're tired of it. If you really want change, you need to vote for change. That means going in there and voting for anybody who does not have a D or an R in front of their name. We need to let them know that we understand we have the tools to make the change, and we are going to demand a change. If you're not going to fix the change, if you're not going to make the change, and you're not going to fix the oppression, and you're not going to fix the crony capitalism, and you're not going to fix the corruption, we're going to fix it. And the only way we can fix it is by voting for change. And the only way we can vote in change is by changing the parties that we keep voting in. Because both these parties keep bringing in and keep bringing forward all this oppression and all this crony capitalism and all this corruption. Both parties are doing it. So if you want change, you need to vote for change. Defunding the police is not change. That's anarchy. I'm not anti-cop. I'm anti-bad cop. I despise bad cops. I'll tell you in a heartbeat, a bad cop is a pig. I have no problem telling you a bad cop is a pig. But police, I have friends who are police. I have family who are police. And I have great respect for good police. And we need good police. And most of our police are good people. They're put in between a rock and a hard place. I have very little respect for the police union, because the police union should be out there touting this, like I am, that, if people want change, that's what they need to do. They need to vote in politicians that are going to roll back these unnecessary laws that are putting the police and the population against one another. Because it's the politicians doing this. What is happening today? I'm going to give the politicians credit. I don't think that they actually intended for somebody to be murdered in cold blood by a police officer on video the way that happened. But as far as making tension between the police and the population, that's what they want. They want the police to fear the population, and they want the population to fear the police. That is what the politicians want, because that creates power, that creates tyranny, and that creates oppression, and that keeps us under their heel. That is what the politicians want. And it's both parties that are responsible for it. Not one, both. Lyndon Johnson is the godfather of our police state. We used to have neighborhood police. Lyndon Johnson is the one that put all the tools in place for that to change, where we don't have neighborhood police anymore. I think we do need a SWAT. I'm not even going to say I'm anti-SWAT. I do think there's a time and a place for SWAT. I do think we need a SWAT outfit. But the SWAT outfit should be a completely different outfit from our regular police. Our regular police should be the police that I remember walking through I can remember growing up, even in Liberty, New York. This is back in the late 80s and early 90s. We had police, they walked the streets of New York. They knew everybody in town by name. They knew who you were. We knew who they were. Yeah, we'd bust their chops as kids, we had Eagle Beak and Barney Fife, and, we busted. Yeah, but at the same time, we respected them. We did respect them when they say, "Hey, Pete, come over here," I was like, "Yeah, fuck you." And no, I was like, "Yes, sir," And then later on, I'd be like, "Yeah, Barney Fife was busting my balls earlier today." But, it doesn't mean, you bust their chops. They bust my chops. I bust their chops. But there was still a sense of respect. And that's what we need again. We need real neighborhood policing. But we have, we need to separate the SWAT from the police. That I do agree. And we need to roll back some of these laws. It is easier to get arrested for simply walking down the street in America than it is in Iran or Moscow or North Korea. I mean, granted, in some of these places, you could just be thrown in jail for any reason that you want to make up. But I'm talking on a legal aspect. As far as actual on the books laws, it is easier to be thrown in jail for simply walking down the street in the United States than it is in those countries like that. So it's obvious that we have a problem with laws. We have way too many laws. There are way too many laws on the books. There are way too many tools for bad cops to abuse. Not good cops, bad cops. That's why we see the things that we see. And it's not just, it doesn't happen to just black people. I know maybe because of my racial makeup, I see things differently. I don't know. I'm mulatto. Actually, I'm black, white, and American Indian. I mean, I got all the cards stacked against me. Ironically, though, the most racist thing that ever happened to me was in Alabama. Four old black men sent me a glass of chocolate milk, and it almost ended in a lynching of myself. I lied to him. I told him my wife was black, my wife was white, but I said, yeah, my black wife loves chocolate milk, and I started drinking. Oh man, all the shit hit the fan. But they sent the chocolate milk to me because they knew what I was. And I just wound up throwing it back in their face, and it pissed them off. But that's the most racist thing that ever actually happened to me. It doesn't mean that I've been completely sheltered from it. I mean, as a kid living in Grahamsville, New York, my friends knew my racial makeup. I didn't hide it, but I didn't go walking around the streets of Grahamsville. Well, it wasn't much of the streets, but it was a little town, but I understood the element that was up on the mountain. So I didn't go around touting to just anybody that I didn't know about my racial makeup. I knew better than that. I understood where I lived, and I understood there was an element in the underbelly that it would get me hurt. So, I've always understood that. But most of my the things I've seen negatively around racism has always come from black people. When I grew up in Liberty, the town was pretty well diversified. I lived in a neighborhood where, actually in the same building, I had Puerto Ricans living next door, had black family living across the street, had me and my family living here, had white people living down the road, had Koreans living over here, it was a diversified neighborhood. Then the whole Tawana Brawley situation hit, and they had her hidden in the church. Then Al came to town, and the whole town changed. And that was my first introduction to segregation. Because now we had white neighborhoods, Korean neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, Puerto Rican neighborhoods, Mexican neighborhoods. That was my first introduction to actual segregation. Prior to that, I never had any understanding of segregation. I mean, I knew of segregation. My mother made sure that we understood our background. She made us watch Roots, and she made sure that we understood, our history. And, my family, we're all proud of our history. We know where we come from, and we know our history, and we're proud of it. We don't hide it. Well, we don't hide it from the people in our lives. When we meet people and we know that, they're friends, share my history with them. I ain't got no shame in it. But our politicians have created more racism since desegregation than the Ku Klux Klan. I've met people on both sides, black and white, who are purists. But they're not racist, they're just purists. They have no problem with people, they just choose not to, both black and white, choose not to be interracial. But they're not racist. And then I've met people that, both black and white, that just despise me for what I am. But our government has done more to fuel racism than these radical supremacist groups, whether they're black or white supremacists. Our politicians have done more to fuel racism than they have. Do you know why black neighborhoods are so impoverished? It's not because of desegregation in that all the white people just ran. That's not what happened. Desegregation came in and communities had a chance to thrive, but then politicians chased all the business out. And because it chased all the business out, which at that time tended to be because it was right on the heels of desegregation, tended to be white. But because it chased all them businesses out, it left only black businesses holding the bag. And then they taxed them even harder. And then those businesses failed. And then you wound up with once thriving communities becoming slums. Or as we call it, the hood. And that's what happened to those neighborhoods. Poor black neighborhoods aren't poor because of racism. Poor black neighborhoods are poor because right on the heels of desegregation, politicians decided to chase all the business out with regulation and taxation. That is what chased away all the business. And that's what's keeping business away. And Amazon is a perfect example of that. I actually applaud the failure of Amazon being able to get all them subsidies and special tax favors. I do applaud that. Because it should be bringing to light to people how overregulated and overtaxed they are. Like I said in the beginning, if a multi-billion-dollar company can't afford to operate because of taxes and regulation, then obviously something is wrong with your taxes and regulation. Subsidies and tax favors isn't the answer. Fixing your tax system and your regulatory system is the answer, so that everybody can compete on the same fair level playing field. That's free market capitalism. And it affects the worker too. Because like I said, even now, today, this year I'm probably going to make about $50,000. There's no way I would go to New York with $50,000. I'm going to be living in poverty again with $50,000 in New York. After all the taxing and regulation and outrageous cost of living due to the taxing and regulation, and then my personal taxing and regulate, I'm going to be a pauper again. There is no way I can afford to live in New York. And and forget about California. I mean, I have it on hold right now, but I have a GoFundMe set up that I just pretty much put on hold. I'm not promoting it because the coronavirus came out, and I'm just working on building up my own business, and then I'm going to use my business to promote the GoFundMe and promote my Rebuilding America, which is aimed around helping the homeless and building homes and rebuilding neighborhoods for the homeless. And through that whole process, building capitalism that the homeless are going to be part of. And it's going to be all through free market. I want to do it through a free market capitalist idea. And it's going to put homeless people back to work and give them the opportunity to get back onto the payrolls and get out of this trap that they're caught in because they haven't been working for years. And it's going to give them that credential that they need to be able to go out and take the skills that they pick up through this whole process and be able to apply them and get back into jobs doing this, or even if they want to do something completely different, but they're going to have a work reference finally. And they're going to have a home. And the neighborhood will build up around them as well. And businesses will come back into those neighborhoods. And that's my whole model around it. That's the whole goal of it. Not the model, that's the goal of it. But I'm not going to do it at all in California. Because there's no way for me to afford to do it in California. It can't be done in California. Not what I want to do. I could do it in almost any other state. I think I could actually do it in Alaska. But I cannot make it work in California. It's impossible for me to make that model work in California because of the regulatory and tax system that they have out there. The homeless people will suffer more if I put them in homes in California because of the regulatory and tax system in California. They will suffer more. They're better off being homeless than me bringing my program to California. And it's disgusting. It kills me. Every time I go through California, it breaks my heart when I'm in LA. It's atrocious what you see going on there. It's the richest state in the country. And what is happening there is atrocious. But it's happening because of their tax and regulatory system. Like I said, I'm not anti-tax and I'm not anti-regulatory. But it's to the point of abusive. It's weaponized. It's no longer productive. It's destructive. And the only way you can change it is you need to change who you're putting in power. And you need to send a message to the government that you understand we have the tools. Because you do. The vote. To vote. The power to vote is an incredible tool. But too many of you are drinking the party Kool-Aid. You're voting for people just because they have an R or a D. Or if you're a libertarian, because they have an L, or because they're of a constitutional party. Although I personally think that's what we need, is to not radical libertarians. They're just as bad as the radical right and the radical left. Not anarchists, but constitutionalists. Yeah, we need people that are going to go back in there and start reversing government. Not reversing desegregation, not things like that. I'm not talking about putting in radical supremacists and things like that. I'm talking about people that actually embrace the Constitution and believe that everybody is created equally. Neither party in power believes everybody is created equally. That's obvious by what they are doing. Neither party believes everybody is created equally. We are all created equally. And we all have the same equal opportunity. And we all have the same right to succeed or fail. But government doesn't believe that. And we have two parties that we keep putting in there that do not believe that. They do not believe that Joe's Bodega has the same right to success as Amazon. Neither party believes that. Both parties believe, oh, whoever can pay me has the right to succeed. Both parties believe whoever can afford to navigate this legal system and pay enormous amounts of money for a really good lawyer has a right to actual justice. That's what they believe. They don't believe that as an American you have an equal right to justice. They believe those that can afford justice have a right to justice. That's what both parties believe. Overwhelmingly. We have some good politicians. Our ratio of good politicians to bad politicians is about the same ratio as bad